Okay, welcome back to your home inspector training. This time around I want to cover again some of the tools that you're going to need on your person as you're doing the inspection. Now, in an earlier segment I talked about what you needed to have in the truck, and I mentioned that your truck is actually one of the tools you got to show up in. So this time we're going to cover what needs to happen on your tool belt. Now, I've tried to fool around with the video camera so that you could actually see, because I am wearing the tool belt, but that's not going to happen in the picture. I'm just way too small in the picture, and you don't need to see me as a distant memory. So first off, everybody knows what a tool belt itself looks like. You're going to want to get one that just fits your needs. I like to do the double pouch sort of thing, and it gives me enough room to have what needs to be in here. So first I want to talk about this moisture meter that I have right here. This one's mine, and this one is ancient, and this one just comes from Home Depot, but if you've got moisture, this is one way to identify. As a matter of fact, one of the stories I have is actually somebody thought that there was moisture and she was livid. And so I came in with this moisture meter and with this thermal camera, and I pointed out to her how these things are different and how they detect water and temperature, et cetera, and I completely addressed the issue so that this crazy, lunatic, angry woman was satisfied. That never happens. You'll find that out yourself. But item number one is this moisture meter, and you'll want to make sure that you have one of these. They don't have to be very expensive. You can get them anywhere from, I don't know, 50 bucks-ish to many hundreds, but you'll want to have a moisture meter. Honestly, I don't use this one very much at all, but it's something you've got to have when push comes to shove. Let's say that maybe there's a mold history, or somebody is wondering maybe if there is a roof leak. Maybe it's a roof leak history, but you can't tell, so you can put this moisture meter up. Be aware that a moisture meter is actually misnamed. Actually, it's a density meter. It measures the density. So it can detect moisture because the moisture is going to change the density of the sheetrock, for example. So the bottom line is it can be fooled. For example, if you've got a stud behind the sheetrock, it will pick that stud up and it will register as a more dense wall in that location, when in fact you don't have water in that sheetrock at all. You just got a stud there. So you're going to have to learn how to use this. Get one of these, use it around your house, and identify what it does and does not do. Okay, next thing I want to show you is this digital thermometer. Again, these can be found fairly inexpensively. You can get them at places like Home Depot, or you can get them at maybe some specialty shops like HVAC shops. And all this is going to do is this is going to tell you, just by pointing it, it's going to tell you the temperature of something. So you can use this with stove and oven, so you're not actually feeling the heat with your hand. You can move this around a room and and see if you got an area that's warmer. Now, if you got the thermal camera, that works a lot better for that. But you got to have one of these. It's just a lot more professional to point this thing inside an oven at a burner rather than stick your body into the oven to show that it's heating up. Another thing is that most of these have a laser. So you can use this as a laser pointing device as well, and that's helpful sometimes. Maybe if it's not too bright a day, you can show what flashing is, or where the soffit might be doing something, or maybe something inside the house up on the ceiling where you got maybe nails that are dropping out of the sheetrock, that sort of thing. It's very helpful to have a laser pointer. If you got one of these with a laser pointer, you don't need to buy a separate one. If you don't have that, you need the laser pointer as well. This guy here is a carbon monoxide meter, and this one I did get at an HVAC shop, but they're available. You can get them on Amazon, etc. And you place them near, for example, the draft hood or at the top side of fireplaces, And this will tell you if there's carbon monoxide in the area. One way that I tested these, because when I got this, it was, it was new and I wanted to make sure that it worked. So I tested a number of things and I kept getting zeros, and that was frustrating. So I did what I knew would cause carbon monoxide. I went out in the garage and I turned on my truck and I closed the garage door and I just let that truck idle in there for only a few seconds. I went out there with this and immediately the CO reading was, was about 500, and I knew that I knew that this thing worked. I also knew that perhaps I'd been a little bit stupid. That's just not something that you want to do. Okay, so that's this guy, and again, you'll want to use this to test anywhere where there's exhaust and make sure that the exhaust is getting around the exterior. By the way, there was one home where it was a brand new model home, and you walk in the front door, living room, and then in that far corner over there, they actually had what they called a ventless fireplace. And I got looking around, I said, where's the vent? And he said, there isn't one. And I said, carbon monoxide, and he said, no, it doesn't do carbon monoxide. So I yanked this guy out, and sure enough, carbon monoxide city, and I might have saved that client's life with this little device. You got to have one of these. Next thing I like to have is just a small cordless screwdriver, and then I have this little bit on it that you can see it's retractable, and I like this guy for getting breaker box covers off. You got to get in there and take a look at things. There's way too much information inside a breaker box to just ignore it. You can't walk past those things. Of course, there's death all over on the inside, but it can be really annoying, especially with older boxes, to just sit there and unscrew and turn. And so you got to have a little screwdriver like this one. And I like to have this little retractable sleeve so that you can just put it on one of the more recent standard screws, and it just finds the hole and you just twist it off, and not a big deal. This thing, helpful. I love this thing. I used to hate dealing with breaker boxes, and now it's not a big deal because I can get those on and off very quickly with this little guy here. Another thing that really ought to be in your tool belt is just this little multi-tool. Now, I don't use this very much, but and it's got all the standard things you would expect. It's got the knives and the screwdrivers and the saws and the bottle openers, etc. And I don't use it much, but sometimes when you run into the right set of conditions, there's nothing like having that tool that you need right here inside your toolbox or inside your tool belt, rather than have to walk back out to the truck and see what you've got that can overcome whatever problem. This is very helpful. Again, they're pretty cheap. Another item I like to have, I don't use it very much again, but it's just a standard utility knife. Nothing fancy about this guy, but sometimes if you're cutting paint or caulk around a breaker box, or if you've got something else going on, it's helpful to have this utility knife so that life gets a little easier. Sometimes I will just use my screwdriver. And again, this is a pretty cheap screwdriver. You get this at Home Depot for less than $5. But this is a 6-way screwdriver. It's got the Phillips, it's got the flat head, it's got large and small, and then it's got the end here that sometimes you'll run into a furnace where it has a hex head, and usually this 6-way screwdriver matches that hex head, and so you can do almost everything you need to do with just one of these guys. And these are dirt cheap. I like to have about 4 of them so that if one walks, I've got more than enough that I can replace them very quickly. Another thing that I like to have, and this one of course I use all the time, it's like it becomes the centerpiece of my inspection because this is always in my hand. And again, you see this is cheap. But this is a plug tester with a GFI button on it. Put that a little closer so you can see that. And not hard to find those at Home Depot or Lowe's. And this will tell you if you've got hot neutral reverse or open ground or open neutral or whatever it is, so that you can write that in. And of course, it's helpful for you to have done this a few times so that you know what some of the readings look like. You need to know what the reading is for hot neutral reverse, for example, or open ground without having to, it's got a chart here, but it's good to just know that before, without having to stare at the chart. I've used these on one brand new home, for example. I found a home that was hot ground reverse, and that's just flat out dangerous. That means that the ground is wired to the hot and vice versa, which means the first time you're using that, you're probably part of the circuit. In this particular case, again, it was a brand new home, so the contractor should have gotten it right, but he definitely did not. And so first time somebody plugs into that, chance they get fried. Cheap little unit like this, you've got to test every plug. I believe ASHI standards call for a representative number of plugs to be tested, but if you can get to it, you need to get to it. And your buyer will notice whether you test every plug. So you got to do every one of them. Now, obviously you got two outlets on each, or two plugs on each outlet, and I don't test both of them. I think that's too much to test both. You might decide that you want to do that. Sometimes one's on the switch and one is not, but I figure that I test enough plugs that I'm not going to test every particular socket that's available. So this guy here, that's in your hand a lot. Another thing, you want a good flashlight and you want a good backup flashlight, and you probably want a backup flashlight. But I like to go with the ones that have the most lumens that I can find. For these guys, it doesn't really matter what the price tag is. I'll get the best one that I can find. And usually they're still not that expensive. I mean, I'm sure you can spend hundreds of dollars, but if you go 30 to 50, you can usually get one of the best ones, or you can get the best one on the store shelf at a lot of hardware stores. So there's that. And here we have just a water pressure device. Again, fairly cheap. You can get these for about $6. Make sure that you have enough washers, because this one, for example, as it hangs around my tool belt for too long, the washer falls out, and then if you try to hook it up to a hose bib without the washer, then it sprays water all over the place, including on you and on the customer. And if it's January, that's not cool. I mean, you're cold, your customer is pissed, etc. So you want to make sure you have a number of backup washers for this guy. And you got to have this guy. He's important. Next, I have, and I had showed this earlier, you're going to have this thermal camera. This one is one of the lower end. I don't actually use this every time I do an inspection. I know a number of guys live and die on this thing. Me personally, I guess I'm kind of an old timer, and I would rather use my brains than gee whiz gadgets. But this definitely has a place, and it can be helpful for showing, for example, if there's a beehive behind the wall, or maybe where you're lacking insulation, that sort of thing. Again, you're going to want to make sure you know what this thing does and looks like, and what normal results are before you go using it on an inspection. Finally, here's another one, just a little hand wrench, and this is the only size that I carry. But this can be helpful for, let's say, for example, that somebody has turned off the exterior gas and you have been requested and authorized to turn it back on. That's still scary, but you got to have something that will turn that, and you can do that with this. And sometimes you'll find other little needs where you just got to have a little wrench, and this guy seems to do pretty much all of it. I have this one preset so that it will turn on a gas valve. By the way, what I do when I do that, I'll tell the buyer that I have never turned a gas valve on myself, but a lot of them have turned themselves on while I was standing nearby. And that kind of lets the buyer know, where I am and how I feel about things. Okay. Finally, you've got this guy. This is a square card reader. As the home inspector, you're going to run into people, especially now in the technology age, where they don't have a checkbook. They've perhaps never had one. If they're millennials, they don't know how to write a check. So you got to come prepared. And one way to do that, if they didn't bring a check, didn't bring a cash, because what I find is that if they walk away from the inspection, maybe they'll pay you later, maybe they won't, but you will absolutely have the grief associated with trying to track them down and say, hey, I'm reminding you, how do you want to pay me, blah, 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 keeping track of who has and has not paid you. I hate it. So doing Square or some other card reader like that is a way to get paid right now, and then you don't have to go through the hassle of who's paid me and who hasn't, and who do I need to nag, and how do I get a hold of them. So this guy also very helpful. Of course, there's always PayPal and Venmo, and as the home inspector, it's better and it makes you look better to be able to be paid in any way. So I tell people, look, I can run a card, I can do PayPal, I can do Venmo, I can take a check, I can do cash. What do you prefer? They can tell that you're doing all you can to make life as easy as possible for them, and you get a bonus point for being that professional. That's what I have. My tool bag is empty, so I have shown you everything. That's what you need to carry on you. Now, I've covered what needs to be in the truck in a different segment, but I'm going to hit it again quickly right here. Inside the truck, of course, you've got to have a truck box. You're going to be carrying a lot of tools like levels and stuff in your truck box, and your big screwdrivers, not the little one that I carry here. You're going to have more flashlights, you're going to have more bits, you're going to have a vacuum in there so that you can clean up your mess after you open up the attic hatch. You're going to have that hammer that I mentioned in one of the other segments. Inside the cab, again, flashlights. I love flashlights. Make sure you got flashlights. Don't ever get caught without a flashlight. That sucks and it makes you look horrible. Make sure you've got food and water in your cab. And food can be the food bars, it can be jerky, but if you got to get to an inspection quickly and you're hungry, you will thank your lucky stars that you've got some food and some water in there. Bring toilet paper. You don't need me to outline the scenario where you've got to have toilet paper and you've got to have it now. If you got toilet paper in your truck, that turns your emergency into just a little bit less of an emergency. Have a towel. Sometimes there's water that gets spilled for whatever reason, and maybe the house is completely vacant and now you've got a wet hardwood floor or wet whatever. You got to have a towel in your truck so that you can clean up the water mess. Finally, you've got to have business cards. Make sure that you have more than enough. Obviously, it makes you look bad if you finish the inspection and somebody says, yeah, I appreciate that, give me a business card or 5 and I'll spread them out. Maybe it's the realtor that just got impressed with you and he wants to send business cards through his brokerage. If you don't have those business cards, you just made yourself look bad. So those are the things that you need on your tool belt, that you need in your truck, and that you need in the truck box outside your truck. We'll be back with more.